Good afternoon, everybody. Fergus Dolan here from NALA. You're very welcome to our webinar on strategies and approaches for teaching reading. We're delighted to have Fionnaigh Connaughton here. Fionnaigh is an experienced tutor and trainer with DALC at the Dublin Adult Learning Centre, and at the Tutors Forum on Saturday, the National Tutors Forum in the National Hotel. Fionnaigh did a talk in the morning and also did a workshop on this subject at the conference. So I'll hand you over to Fionnaigh. All the best, Fionnaigh.
Thanks very much. Thanks a million, Fergus. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to be here and great to have people on board. As Fergus said, I've been working for 20 years now in as an adult literacy tutor and trainer. And I work in DALC, the Dublin Adult Learning Centre. We're a literacy centre based in the North Inner City in Dublin. And, you know, we do everything from basic literacy. We have a significant ESOL programme now in Ukrainian groups. We do some community education and also work-based skills. So kind of further education, level 4 and level 5. Yeah, we work in a very kind of creative, participative way and very student-centred. So yeah, so look, I have my email up there, and please, I'm more than happy to engage with people if there's anything I've covered or said today that you'd like to talk to me about. All right, so okay, now as Fergus said, I think all good adult education should be participative rather than kind of lecture based. So I have this picture up here. I just kind of wanted, now obviously I'm not going to go around the whole Zoom or the room, but just maybe to check in with how you're feeling. You know, I mean, it is the 1st of February. It's great that spring is in the air. This is something I think icebreakers are always good to do with groups. So this is just a very simple visual. You know, you might be feeling kind of 80%, you might be feeling 40%. So hopefully by the end of the webinar, you'll all be 100% topped up and feel energized from it, that we're kind of sharing ideas. Okay, just a very brief outline for the plan for the webinar. I'm going to give an input on reading strategies, all right, for about sort of 20 minutes. Now, I'm going to keep it very practical because I don't know what level you're working with, what group, what setting, you know, if you're working with ESOL or one-to-ones or further education and so on. Yeah, and I'm going to do breakout rooms, okay? And it's really a chance to kind of share your practice and applying some of the strategies today to your work, and we'll get some feedback. All right, so I'm going to kick off really with looking at what is reading. So, okay, now I would say there's 4 main kind of components to reading. And now I suppose they're equally as important actually, but the first one there is letter sound correspondence. Now this is your phonics. Now I know a lot of people think, I don't know if people use phonics in their practice, but a lot of people would say English doesn't, you know, there's lots of kinds of silent letters and it doesn't follow a system, but it definitely does. And I look at these in more detail. Okay, the next one then is knowledge of vocabulary, social side, prior knowledge. And this is really kind of your visual, I suppose. You know, social side words you see all around you, and getting meaning from the text, which again I look at. So, for example, if you looked at a menu, you know what words you might expect to see in it and so on. Okay, yes, prediction then, number 3. This is really your syntax, grammar and meaning. So as people become more proficient with reading, they develop these skills, you know. So like if I read the sentence to you, Tom eats cereal for breakfast, but then if I said, you know, Tom eats a giraffe for breakfast, you might think, oh, that doesn't make sense. So it's kind of a meaning, you know. So these are kind of skills that, you know, it's good to know that these are skills you're working on, but also skills that the student is developing. And finally, really important is comprehension, because I would argue that comprehension is more important really than decoding, because reading is about understanding the written word or whatever text adults are faced with, and that's the most important thing. Okay, so to go into it in more detail now, I've given you lots of information there, but letter sound correspondence, that's really phonics, which is the system of teaching the connection between sounds and letters. Understanding phonemes, that there's an individual sound, phonological awareness, so this is the ability to rhyme and so on. Okay, now you can see I have the alphabet up there. Now with all students, I sometimes would print that out and use it kind of as a bookmark, just so people feel there's a kind of a system, and it can be a real eureka moment for students, that they realize actually I have a word attack skill for an unfamiliar word, you know, I can sound it out. Okay, so I would say now phonics I think for adults, is done more in an integrated way rather than for children, you know. So when you're reading, it's always good to integrate what you do. So if a student comes across basically an unfamiliar word, that they're able to kind of have a go at it. Like I thought of the word pandemic because it's one that we're familiar with. It's a brilliant word to break up. You might look at the first letter and say P has the letter, what sound does the letter P have? So I'm not sure what experience people have with phonics, how familiar they are with the sounds, but just to kind of explain in brief that there's 44 sounds in English and 26 letters. So some of them have more than one sound, some of them combine to make a new sound, but usually the consonants in black have one sound. The vowels can be a little bit tricky. And here, this is kind of a bit more detailed, but consonant combinations. So that's your SH, TH, CH, and so on. So again, as these come up, I think as tutors, it's very good to be aware of these things. I mean, obviously you don't do them all together, but to be aware of that. And then vowel combinations would be OO and EA and so on. And then prefixes and suffixes, word beginnings and word endings. So kind of that they realize that a student realizes, you know, ing, for example, is a word ending or a suffix, or a prefix then is like unhappy. So they start to become familiar with things. Like there's loads of ways of working on phonics. You know, you could say cut up the alphabet as an icebreaker, take out a letter, what sound does it have? Beating syllables in your name. You know, using highlighters to count syllables, things like that. Making word searches on a particular word family. So say if you had "ite" words, fight, light, sight, you know, that students become familiar with things, and it helps spelling as well as reading. Okay, right. The next slide then is to do with vocabulary, social sight, and prior knowledge. Okay, so this is basically kind of everyday signs, okay, that people bring to a text. So, I mean, we're surrounded with them, you know, words like exit, and even during COVID, we got used to the yellow and black signs and things like that. Even things like icons, visual things like, you know, the Facebook symbol and so on, street signs, you know. Yeah, and then bringing prior knowledge to reading. So any text that you do, well, I suppose all learning and all reading that you do should be kind of learner centered. So if you were doing, say, the example of a reading piece to do with the student's hobby or a group's hobby, it could be around sport or football, cooking, pigeons. I've done loads of texts like that, that they're able to recognize some of those words. So if, for example, you'd find a student is able to recognize words like championship, you know, words like messy or whatever that come up from the piece. And also using clues in a text. So say if you get a letter from the GP, if you get a letter from the hospital or a text from the school, what words might you expect to see in it? You know, you'll see things like appointment, you'll see things, if you're, you know, if you get a text from the school, it might be homework club or whatever, you know, so context clues or a menu, or things like that you'd see words related to food. Okay. Prediction skills. So again, all of these, this is the third skill I'd mentioned, and all of these things kind of happen, they sort of come together. But awareness of punctuation, you know, when you're reading, sentences begin with the capital letter, end with the full stop, and how it affects meaning. Now, grammar is something, again, you know, if something makes sense. I would link grammar and that together, you know. And also I mentioned sentence stems. That's a kind of a good way of developing prediction skills. So you could give a student the beginning of a sentence, you know, I went to the shop and I bought, what could it be, you know, things like that. So yeah, so things like, you know, jumbling up sentences, close, all of those really help to develop prediction skills. What do you think might happen? Okay, and then finally comprehension. All right, so I would say this is more important than decoding. This is the overall understanding and meaning. Now, I've put two pointers there. Monitoring comprehension. So this is when you stop all the time. You might go back and check, can you follow what you're reading? You know, is it what you expected? You know, can you say if it was a functional, you know what I mean by functional text, if it was a real world text, like a letter from the hospital, can you remember when the appointment is and so on, you know? All right, so that's kind of a whistle-stop tour through all the elements of reading. Now, I'm going to look at some samples here, first with the basic student and then with strategies that help with all levels. Now, you probably are familiar with the language experience approach. It's a really important tool and approach in adult literacy. And really, it just means that you're using the student's own words or vocabulary to generate a text. So this student here, her name is Martha. I sat down with her and she told me a little bit about herself. So language experience is really that the student speaks and you write down the words that they use. And usually it's kind of used in a one-to-one, but I think it can be used in a group as well. But any topics like writing about family, friends, hobbies, food. So they're kind of words and topics that are meaningful to the student, you know. Recently with my ESOL group, one student was at a wedding. So he told us all about a wedding. He's originally from Afghanistan. So we wrote up a couple of things and we looked at wedding cultures in Ireland. We used Google Images, you know. So, and what I did was I created a little story, kind of 10 lines, but I used sort of an A5 when you print it out and it looked like a book. So people feel they get the, you know, they know what it's like to read a book, you know, so you could put those sentences in it. So how do you use the language experience approach then to develop reading skills? So you could read it together. Now, I think people who are starting off with literacy and particularly pre-literate, word recognition can be a thing. So you ask the student to hold their finger underneath, show me the word name, show me the word children, show me the word like, and so on. So you could cut up each sentence, get them to rearrange it. Use flashcards. So you have a high frequency word like and children on a card. And then you could add more. So they said they like red onion and cucumber in a salad, which sounds delicious, I have to say, but they could write more about what they like to eat. And then I mentioned the DALC list. I mentioned phonics, but I think giving students an awareness of the DALC list, they're the high frequency words, is really important. That's your word, like words like is and. They make up half of all reading, you know. So I can give handouts via Fergus if anyone is interested in that. Okay, now you're probably wondering why I have a picture of Messi up here. I don't know if anyone are football fans, but you probably couldn't avoid the World Cup. So I'm just going to look at a really useful approach for reading strategies at all levels and all needs. Okay, so whether you're working on any text, like a functional text, a story, a piece of fiction, something they need to do for QQI or whatever, and even at all levels. So for basic and moving on. Okay, so pre-reading. I'm going to just show you this. Now, I tried to give an example. I know that I must actually mention font. That font is Times New Roman, but if you were doing it in the real world, you know, you'd use probably Comic Sans or Century Gothic, and you would, what was I going to say? You would make it bigger and things like that. But anyway, the pre-reading you do there is you start off by asking questions, prior knowledge, okay? So, can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you, Fiona, yeah.
That's fine. I thought that the internet. So the pre-reading that you would do with this text. Okay, so say the student you're working with, he's kind of QQI level 3, interested in football, interested in current affairs. The pre-reading strategies which you would do is access prior knowledge. You might say to him, what do you know about the World Cup? Did you watch it? Who did you watch it with? Where was it on? And you write up some vocabulary, you know, Argentina, Qatar, football, family, you know, words that come up. You also might predict, so you could read the headline, the bittersweet feeling. So obviously is when they won and he had to wear this robe. They might be a little bit aware of the controversy, you know, so you could ask them to kind of predict what it might be about. And a good rule of thumb with any text is read it at least 3 times. So 3 times would be the tutor would read it just for overall meaning. Maybe ask the student to read it if they like, and then read it again just before you understand it. Because I think students feel, oh gosh, I read something once and I don't know it. Like you need to read it at least 3 times, you know. So that kind of pre-reading is what you do. Some kind of lead into it, pre-teaching vocabulary, writing up some of the tricky words. So let me go back again. The during reading strategy that you would do with that text or any text is underline, and this is probably what you do already, underline any tricky words, pick out some word families. You have moments there, tournament. Could you think of any other ment words, apartment, and so on? Monitoring comprehension. So you could read maybe the first couple of lines and say, oh, what do you think that was about now, or whatever. So monitoring the whole time, okay? And then finally, your post-reading is something you do with every text. This is your follow-on questions. So you could do it sort of open-ended questions where you ask someone, you know, who won the World Cup, and get them to write it. You could do true or false. You could do kind of opinion type questions. Do you agree with the fact that he had to wear this robe or whatever? You know, you could do maybe looking up words in the dictionary and so on. You know, so the kind of opinion type questions are good for critical thinking, higher level, you know, reading skills. Okay, so very briefly, I want to mention the concept of scaffolding. Okay, now, and in relation to reading. So you might know something about Vygotsky's theory. Look, basically it is, in simple terms, it is, you know, when you're working with a student, you say to yourself, is what I'm asking them to do too hard, or is what I'm asking them to do too easy? And it's about pitching the text at the right level. And in this theory, it's all about knowing who your student is, what they want to do, where the gaps are, and what you do next. So a lot of it is the relationship is key, really, with scaffolding. So I love practical examples. So I'm going to give you an example. I had a student, let's call him Lean, a couple of years ago. He worked as a builder, and he had a lot of health issues. So he got a huge amount of letters from the hospital, you know, with appointment dates and things like that. So he had huge difficulty. So do you see in the blue there, I knew what he can, sorry, the green, pardon me. He was able to, he knew the days of the week, he could recognize them and so on. He couldn't read letters from the hospital, that was the blue, but what he could do was he knew a little bit about the calendar, and he was able to kind of match, you know, the days of the week with finding dates. So we did a little bit of work around that, you know, to kind of scaffold and help for him to be able to be independently reading. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And again, any questions, clarification, ask me. All right, just to close then, just a word about materials. Okay, because I know with any of these workshops, we always think, oh gosh, what materials am I using? What materials would be good to use and so on. Okay, so really with materials, there's a huge amount of materials out there you probably are using, like small readers that you could create yourself. Book Creator is very good. Authentic texts, and by that, when students bring in material that they need, you know. But I would say simplifying, that's the first one there. You know, any newspaper article from, you know, the journal.ie, RT News, anything like that, you know, copy and paste it, simplify it into simple language, but don't dumb everything down. You might adapt it slightly. Creating materials, that's your language experience when you create your own materials and worksheets. And digital, then I use a fantastic tool called wordwall.net, which is really, really good. And then I just want to have mention or give a word to methodologies. So that's methodologies that you use in your groups. Silent reading. I think sometimes students think reading is reading aloud, but very few occasions in life do we have to read aloud, to be honest, maybe at a wedding or in church or something, you know. So silent reading, just to get them familiar with browsing a text. Paired reading works really well. So when I put students together, you know, they help each other. One might read a sentence or fill in, and then reading aloud. So audio books are great as well, you know, based on what people are interested in. And even the tutor reading aloud, getting used to reading, getting familiar and things like that. Now, I'm just going to finish actually with a couple of quotes before we do the breakout rooms. And the first one then, I hope everyone can see it, is by John Dewey. He's an American educationalist and reformist and all that, but I just thought it was a nice one. Education is preparation for life. Sorry, education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. Just, I picked that one because sometimes we sort of say students should be great readers before they do anything, but really, you know, I suppose it's called the social practice model, but really it's about having a go, you know, interacting with reading, you know, trying to be independent and trying to do it yourself is really important. I also have a quote there by Bell Hooks. You might be familiar with Bell Hooks, you know, the activist and so on. She's quite political, her writings, but life transforming ideas have always come to me through books. So it's that idea where, you know, often basic readers are not basic thinkers, but it's the idea that you're developing, you know, a sort of critical thinking, and you want your students to be, you know, have confidence, to have an opinion about what they're reading and so on. Okay, and finally, on days like this, we often forget about the student voice. And this is a lovely quote by one of my own students. Okay, so you can read it there. I can see things on posters that I've never seen in my whole life. Like before, it was just a blank wall. I can see things now I've never seen before. So it's that idea that, you know, you're facilitating a very positive environment for people to be more open to the world of reading. So I hope now people enjoy that. A lot of information, okay, there. So Fergus, I might just introduce the breakout rooms. Hello? Stop sharing.
I think Fergus might have hopped off, but he's back now.
Okay. Yeah, so you know what, I might introduce the breakout room. Now I hope.
All right, sorry.
Now I went through that actually quite quickly, but just before I introduce the breakout rooms, any questions or comments on anything in the presentation before we give the breakout room exercise?
Just unmute if you want to ask Fiona anything.
Yeah, do exactly unmute, or I'd encourage you to put them into the chat as well, just if people like. Yeah. No, okay. Yeah, it might come up actually as a discussion in the breakout room. Hopefully it will. And just to say, I think you know, good adult education is always participative. So I think breakout rooms are great, just because, you know, lecture style and listening to me, I think it's very good to sort of apply what you're doing. So I'm going to just explain what I'd like you to do. Okay. Now Fergus is going to, I think, have maybe four groups. So now with this, because this screen will be gone, as you know, from the breakout rooms, what I want you to do is either take a picture on your phone or else jot down, but it's pretty straightforward. Really, it's what strategies from today will help with your current group or students. So I actually don't know what setting people are working in. If I was working with you in the real world, I'd go around the room and ask people. So it could be, you know, thinking about how you might use the pre-reading, during reading, post-reading with an ESOL group, how you might use phonics or introduce it, how you might do paired reading with your men's group or whatever, scaffolding or materials, anything that I've mentioned. It's about applying anything from what you did, and it's really just a chance to share your own experience. So does that make, I hope that makes sense. So what strategies can you apply? Okay, I hope that makes sense.